for your welcome, Frank. I appreciate it. I'm usually on the stand with Frank doing Chuck Berry. And Frank is very good in the Chuck Berry front. And I'm slightly discombobulated by this thing. And I did a lot of stuff in Adelaide years past, but I haven't done anything like this before in Sydney. I just like to start by saying it's just fantastic to see the way you people get out in a cold night and the passion that you share. And there's various documents showing the various causes that you're involved with. And it's admirable, and I feel a bit guilty that I haven't done more in these sorts of things. And when Frank invited me, I thought, well, here's a chance for me to tighten some of my ideas up, particularly on the question of what constitutes the national interest, what constitutes the question of national security, and what constitutes the issue of sovereignty. And in those terms, I'd like to start off by saying it was great to hear Nick's perspective, but I couldn't agree less with his notion that the idea of the greatest threat to world peace is the USA, because the concept of the USA as a bunch of people that I teach and I know well, and I've been sharing their lives for the last 15 or so years, is not helpful. These are people who largely, the ones I teach now, hate Trump. They hate any of the idea of American imperialism, and they hate the concept that they're coming to Australia and they're lampooned because of their president. So all power to Nick's passionate campaign in terms of confronting this appalling violation of national sovereignty by having American troops to our north. But to me, what I'm looking for is getting another dimension to that, to link the character of American power to the character of American imperialism as a political economy concept. We had various imperial regimes over human history, and of course the British one were similarly aggressive in terms of the way they dealt with colonial peoples, and similarly aggressive in terms of demanding that their oppressed colonial provinces behave according to their ambitions and imposing troops within their countries. What I'm trying to say is we've got to get out of that notion that the problem is Americans for a start, and that the problem consists solely in terms of a national identity enforcing something on the world. To me, it's imperialism. The character of American imperialism is the issue. And America is very strongly linked to Australia. And Australia's imperialist activities in the South Pacific are legion. We go to all of these islands, we rip up the resources from them, and then we call them failed states when they don't have the economic capacity and the wherewithal to survive in the longer run. It's just an outrage to make that presumption. Australia is part of American imperialism, and that's, to my mind, the imperative for us to be able to broaden the concept and support the passion of anti-bases and the variety of campaigns that we have, but to try and get another dimension, the left to build another dimension to understand the links between global capitalism and the way in which its needs enforce this sort of apparatus, like a global security apparatus. Anyway, that's a bit of an introduction. So what I'm interested in is defining the character of the national interest and sovereignty and the question of security. And I'm just trying to dig that out. And well, I'm going to start by saying, what do we want? What do we want? We have slogans, and all of those slogans are legitimate and appropriate. And I'm saying, we want a unifying, stimulating foundation to confront the international bourgeoisie.
When do we want it?
Now! So what I'm trying to do is get that dimension. As comrades in arms in the political economy front, Frank Stillwell, we address things in that sort of way. All right. So from the anti-basis struggle, I urge us to combine the context of national security and the national interest in terms of the development of a program for the left. Our leaders use national interest in equating it with national security. This seems to be the priority. The fear campaigns, the notion of paranoia developing, Currently it's the Chinese. Yesterday it was the Indonesians. My father, we grew up believing that the yellow peril was at our doorstep. First, of course, it was Menzies selling pig iron to the Japanese, and they're the enemy. And of course, then it's the communists. It's yellowness or something, or it's gravitation. They're going to come and get us. So I grew up with this sort of racist crap entrenched in my mind until I started doing a textile technology course in Geelong and met a lot of Chinese people, and I realised that my father was totally corrupted by the tradition of the White Australia policy and the bulletin Australia for the White Man. So the leadership have created this mystique over the years, and we've got to dig into there and see what this means in terms of security and national interest. On Monday, I went with Keith Suter to Canberra with about a couple of dozen American kids to see the old Parliament House. So I showed my lot around, introduced them to the character of Gough Whitlam in terms of his interest in bringing Australia more into the United Nations, the institutions and apparatus, introduced them to Curtin and his moving away from our alliance to the British, introducing them to Paul Keating in the way that Keating tried to break Australia away from those traditional racist constraints and connect us more to Asia, particularly Indonesia, and introducing them to John Howard, of course, then going back, reversing that sort of agenda that had been progressing on the basis of appalling one nation campaigns of racism developing out of that. So John Howard rode in on the basis of that incredible insularity and antagonism. So I think they got a bit of a gist of the character of our history in terms of linking in with our various leaders. But what got me, and what I first saw, and I hadn't been reminded for ages, was when you go into to Parliament House, the old Parliament House, you see this gigantic phallic symbol with an eagle on the top, facing major centres of Australian defence establishment. Now, this is a symbol of us as a victim, as being tied like to the hip, as we've been hearing, but in terms of that attitude, that just hits you in the face, and I wanted to point that out to the students. We went to the War Museum, and I wandered around this place. We had a couple of hours at that, and I was completely shattered. It's years since I've been to it. I was completely shattered, and I hope a lot of our students were shattered by the notion that there's a whole rendition of applauding our troops and what they did in foreign countries without any question of why they were there. The sources, first, of the villainy that they're attacking, secondly, the nature of the character of the countries that caused us to go in the first instance, or any connection between Australia and America in terms of we go everywhere, every war they do, on the basis of our great and powerful friend, which we previously did with the British. None of that is in any of the what do you call them, dioramas, or any of those representations of lots of vivid expressions, particularly of the latter years of the horrors facing the troops in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but no explanation of the character of the connection between Australia. What the hell are we doing there? No origins of the character of us going there is in the representations at all. It's just a complete horror to get that feeling. So I was thinking more in terms of preparation for this about how we represent our Australia, our pride, our loyalty, our notions of support for the dominant imperial powers in terms of, this is the only way that we can function. No critique. And I think the left has to do more to build out an understanding of those sorts of forces that define why are we scared. Why are we scared now about the Chinese? What is it? Why were we scared yesterday about the Indonesians? What is it? What's the character of the people that cause us to be so paranoid? So this, peace and freedom thing, and we stayed at the end to the service at the end, the lovely bugle, the last post, and some bagpiper in a skirt. It was just gorgeous. The hair was standing up my end. It was 10 degrees below, so probably on my arms. That's probably part of the reason. But, my father fought in Gallipoli. A couple of uncles fought in Gallipoli. And it goes back, and that is really part of the whole endeavour of creating a mystique of what is national security and why we fought. This person died for us. We're so proud of what he did. Now, I can never understand why my father went. I still don't understand. I went to the wonderful National Library in Melbourne the other day and dug up letters that he'd written at the time, and antagonism towards Britain was clearly written right through there, but no real understanding of why they were there. So this museum reflects, in my mind, the national security priority. We fight in Iraq, Syria to protect our freedoms, national security. No, we fight because of the alliance. Is this in the national interest? This is not a question that is even put to us, the people. Howard goes to war, no discussion, no answer as to what had to do with us, still no answer. I wrote to Tanya Plibersek and Penny Wong about our continuing involvement in Syria. The answers were banal and totally unhelpful. There is no capacity to really get a total addressing of the process. But the times are changing, and because we have Trump in, we have Penny Wong writing an op-ed in the Sydney Morning Herald, opening the possibility. She says, "Our collective task now is to carefully and dispassionately consider Australia's foreign policy and global interests over coming months and how best to affect these within the alliance framework." Well, people like Peter Archer picks up and says, the Labor Party is shifting its position. No, it's not. It's just saying we must consider the possibilities of having our alliance work more amicably because some ratbags in the White House. So the concept of ally relates directly not only to the question of security, it relates to the question of economic interests. And I think Pat Ranald within AFTINET, the Anti-Free Trade Network, has articulated that, and it comes very closely to me as a former trade union official. This relates directly to our lives. Not only does the question of international strategic security and all the reason that the troops have moved in under the invitation of a former Australian Labor Prime Minister to Darwin and to expand their military opportunities up the north, but we have accepted the whole agenda of the American imperial powers, such as the Washington Consensus, globalization, neoliberalism, is all part of that agenda. This is all part of the international global imperial agenda of the American corporate class, tied in with the Australian Western corporate class. And so you can't distinguish or make any distinction, to my mind, with that sort of process going on. So we talk about national sovereignty. We're also talking, as Pat Ranald says, about what the free trade deals mean. Okay, we have a good mateship free trade deal with America, or start an initiative of the TTP relationship with America and other countries in the region, but we don't have any grasp nationally of the way this undermines our sovereignty. This is tied in very closely to the security issue, I believe. Couple of minutes, damn. Okay, yes, I said Julia Gillard supported the US aims to check China, and so it is by having these forces in the Northern Territory. But also the military apparatus in Australia has opposed, in the light of America's antagonism to these bases, to the forces in Darwin, antagonism towards the control of the port by Chinese interests, by introducing greater security apparatus within the Foreign Investment Review Board, which removed the possibility of Ausgrid, the New South Wales electricity supplier, being controlled by a couple of Chinese companies. And this is in essence because the Turnbull government, Morrison accepted the Foreign Investment Review Board's advice saying that this was a violation of national security in the light of the pressure from a former director of an Australian Security Intelligence Organisation and other Australian intelligence services, David Irvine, who promoted that sort of idea. So it's very tightly entrenched. In terms of my trade union connection, as a former secretary of a federal union, I experienced the way in which the national interest is exploited by the corporate class to serve their ends. The Federal Industrial Commission rejected my wage increase claims as against the national interest. What is the national interest to them? I mean, this is bringing the whole thing down in terms of a corporate ambition tied in with the military-industrial complex in terms of preventing the rights of workers whose wages have been constrained to having a decent increase in standard of living. Now, a former colleague of mine at New South Wales University, Michael Wesley, who's sort of like a boy wonder, I think, Profession of International Affairs, Dean of the College of Asia, and a former ONA official, denies the necessity that I'm pushing for a coordination of ideas by saying, well, okay, national security cannot incorporate questions of global warming, question of foreign ownership of our national resources, particularly agricultural. Security can refer to a broad and widening range of concerns, pandemics, climate change and so forth, but security is not an all-hazards policy space. It's about existential threats. They are coming over the hills and they're going to kill us. It's helpful, very helpful in defining the character of the security threat that excludes what to my mind are as equivalent, perhaps more important security threats such as global warming. A very neat and necessary capacity by the ruling establishment to impose a way of understanding what constitutes national interests. So I believe that we've got to build a new conceptual framework to account these all hazards as part of our daily lives. And then when we do deals with America in terms of free trade, we understand the violations this constitutes in terms of sovereignty. I think that'll do. Thanks, folks.